Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. We continue with the profound meaning of the Daimoku, the entity of the wonderful and difficult to understand law. Nichiren continues, in the final analysis, after you've looked into all the meanings of the characters and the symbolism as well as the actual aha, the perception of what we're talking about here, the Renge, the meaning of the Lotus Sutra, the Myoho Renge Kyo, is that the metaphor is none other than the entity of the law, the experience of this engine of life itself. And the entity of the law is none other than the metaphor being not the metaphor in words or in pictures, but in the inculcation of the idea, the meaning, the being in it. Talking about how it functioned, what it looked like, using examples from life is all well and good to communicate, but that communication isn't it. The metaphor, the idea being explored here, is it. So that is the experience, though you may use words to get to it, the experience of it is the same. To experience it and to talk about it is essentially the same thing. That is why the great teacher Dengyo in his commentary says, quote, the Lotus Sutra, the Myoho Renge Kyo, contains a great many metaphors and parables. Oh yes, we know. However, when it comes to the major parables, we find that there are 7 of them. Interesting, that number 7 again. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo 7. The 7 jewels, the 7 this, the 7 that. It's throughout Buddhism, 7s, yeah? These 7 parables are none other than the entity of the law. Just as Myo is represented in parables, so is Ho, so is Ren, and Ge, and Kyo. And the entity of the law is none other than these metaphors and parables, because without communicating it, how can anyone understand the idea? In fact, it's essentially what we're doing when we chant. When we invoke and we sit in respect in front of our Butsudan, our home of our enlightenment, and focus on this mandala to open our Gohonzon mind of Buddha-ness, we do so samsarically by invoking it with sounds made through our bodies. And by making those sounds in our bodies with commitment and attitude, we are, though the sounds are coming out of our mouth, we are training our mind, our sentient mind, into Buddha-ness. There's the duality right there. That's why we chant, because we are samsaric beings. But through this invocation, we train our mind, our sentient, witnessing, observing mind, through this unfiltered, complete expression of potential. It'd be nice if we could just switch to it in our minds. But our samsaric life is so attached to physicalness that we have to distract it. And this is the mechanism, chanting. Therefore, there is no entity of the law outside of the metaphors and parables, and there is no metaphor and parable outside the entity of the law. In other words, the entity of the law refers to the entity of the truth of the essential nature of phenomena, while the metaphors and parables represent the entity of the wonderful and difficult to understand law as manifested in actual phenomena. So there is a process of instantiation, expression from potential, and we see it in phenomena. But It's not about the phenomena, it's about that engine. How is this life happening? Discussing it is to identify it, samsara, and by identifying it, we can train our minds to observe it, to be completely inculcated, embrace it, live it. That's why an invocation, yeah? The manifestations are none other than the entity of truth. The entity of truth is none other than the manifestations. This is why we say everything is enlightenment. That's why we say, as in the Virmalakirti Sutra, that this land of possessions and thingness and all of its expressions, phenomena, is itself the Buddha land, the land of tranquil light, the land, it is all enlightenment, because that's what's creating it. Just got to get into the flow of that momentum that is the creation of moments of time, of every phenomena. Be with it instead of constantly trying to grab it and hang on to it. If previous moments, gone. No wonder we suffer. Therefore, it can be said that the law and its metaphors constitute a single entity. This is why the passages from the treatises and the annotations by the Tendai school all explain the lotus as both the law itself and the metaphor for it. This passage is perfectly clear in meaning, and therefore I need say nothing further. Really? Okay. Question. During the Thus Come One's lifetime, who was able to realize the lotus of the entity of the law, the Myoho Renge? Kyo. Answer. During the period of the 4 flavors and 3 teachings that preceded the Lotus Sutra, the Myoho Renge Kyo, there were persons of the 3 vehicles, the 5 vehicles, the 7 expedient means, and the 9 worlds, and the bodhisattvas of the provisional perfect teachings, as well as the Buddha of this teaching, but with the exception of the Buddha of the lifespan chapter of the essential teaching, neither any of these persons nor the Buddha of the theoretical teaching had so much as heard the name of the lotus, of the Renge, of the entity expounded in the essential teaching, much less realized it. Now, when he says, nor the Buddha of the theoretical teachings, he's not talking about Shakyamuni himself. He's talking about the representation, the personage Shakyamuni took on as a teacher. How can I say this another way? I know I liked math in school. A lot of you probably will say, not me. But you'll understand this analogy, I think. What else could I talk about? Let's talk about an art teacher, right? We all liked art in school. That art teacher is teaching you how to use materials, how to create illusions on paper, on canvas, whatever. And you're learning about art, or at least how you might train your mind to express art, but you may not be thinking that profoundly about it. Just you're making pictures. But all the while, unbeknownst to you, and if you remember your years in junior high school, elementary, or even high school, or maybe even college, your teacher may be a highly accomplished, very respected professional artist with shows all over the world. But you wouldn't know that. He's not there to impress you with his creds, right? He's there to help you along. So the art teacher that you know is certainly much more capable than you are at the time. But his exalted example in your life, Buddha, is a limited Buddha. You don't see it as limited because of your limitations. Follow? But once you go to college, once you spend much of and you invest in your efforts to become an artist, a professional artist, or a well-known artist, and maybe you run into this teacher at an exhibit of his or her works, and you go, wow, you're not at all who I thought you were. You're something completely different, more or less, whatever, but different, yeah? Wow, you're Buddha, your full expression, far beyond what I thought it was in our little high school class. Do you understand? The Buddha that Nichiren is identifying is the perception limited by the teaching. This is why you have like Hinayana, the Agama Sutras, the early Mahayana, all these steps, because all of those people who were dedicated in their practice understood a goal that itself was not fully realized. And so by reaching that goal provisionally, they had not accomplished the totality of the teaching. They just accomplished the totality of that level of the teaching, that level of understanding. So when he says the Buddha of the provisional teachings is not the full Buddha, now you understand, yeah? So this isn't a reflection on Shakyamuni, it's a reflection on his students, the perception attached to a term, language. All right. Sorry, I keep playing with the mic. I lost myself. During the first 40 and more years of his teaching life, the Buddha Shakyamuni did not make clear the doctrine of the Lotus or of unsurpassed enlightenment that reveals the replacement of the three vehicles with the one vehicle. That is why the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra says, quote, they will in the end fail to gain unsurpassed enlightenment, end quote. By which it means that the Lotus of the replacement of the three vehicles with the one vehicle, which the Buddha revealed in the theoretical teaching, was never expounded in the period before the preaching of the Myoho Renge-kyo. Much less, then, did he reveal the Lotus of the entity, that of, quote, opening the near and revealing the distant, end quote, of the, quote, true identity that is difficult to conceive. Right? The fusion of reality and wisdom. Wisdom being the observer, the witness of this process, the reality. Fusing those two. That's Buddha wisdom. That's a mental awareness that everything is in constant change. And in that constant change, there is opportunity to express beauty or to express difficulty. How could Maitreya and the others who were taught and converted by the Shakyamuni Buddha in his transient status have had any understanding of such things? They were still learning the basics. He hadn't taught the full and perfect enlightenment method yet, how to self-realize. They all thought they were going there, but those were all provisional. They were just trying to get out of high school with a diploma. They weren't thinking about masters or PhDs. We don't need that, right? Question, how do we know that the bodhisattvas of the perfect teaching expounded before the Lotus Sutra, or the Bodhisattvas of the perfect teaching set forth in the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra, were not enlightened to the lotus of the entity of the essential teaching. How do we know they didn't reach it, even without Shakyamuni's explicit instruction? Answer: the Bodhisattvas of the perfect teaching expounded before the Lotus Sutra did not understand the lotus of the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra, and the Bodhisattvas of the perfect teaching set forth in the theoretical teaching did not understand the lotus of the essential teaching. Right? They're just steps along the way. It's not until the light. Think about this. After all these well over 40 years of teachings, Shakyamuni never once explained to his students that he, Shakyamuni, Siddhartha Gautama, the great sage of the Shakya clan, Shakyamuni, that's what it literally means, he presented himself as the Buddha. It was not until the lifespan chapter of the lifespan of the Tathagata, the 16th, the Juryo chapter of the Lotus Sutra, the Myoho Renge-kyo, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I'm not it." What? I'm not it. I'm not this special deity imbued with all this power that you're all trying to understand. No. This Buddha-ness, you are all the same as me. You are all capable of realizing this very singular one vehicle truth. Yeah. You can do exactly as I have. Invoke your Buddha-ness. Invoke your boundless moment-to-moment expression of all potential. Do it. This is how. This is how I did it. This is how you do it. Really? Yeah. I am not Buddha. I have instantiated Buddha in my life, in my being, in my mind. And when I die, Nirvana Sutra, when I die, all you need do is continue. This is you doing this. You're not doing this for me, by me, around me, because of me. This is you doing this. All my yakking for 50 years has been training you to see Buddha. It's not mine. Imagine that perceptive aha moment. I mean, my first thought is a lot of people would just go, yeah, right. They'd just shut it off. No way. It's been here all along. I'm trying to learn from you and to be like you, but being like you ain't it. Being like what's forming me. Holy crap, I've been doing it all along. I just haven't been aware of it. What a difference that makes. Tendai says, quote, "Even successors of the Buddha of the provisional teachings do not know people who have received instruction from the Buddha of the theoretical teaching, and people taught by that Buddha do not know people who have received instruction from the Buddha of the essential teaching," end quote. So that sounds like some kind of social experiment, doesn't it? But again, Tendai is making the point, and Nichiren's quoting it because he gets it. that even if you've been practicing Buddhism your whole life, up to and including the first part of the Lotus Sutra, you still don't get it. Because everything you're learning and telling yourself is based on this holy man. And that's not Buddha-ness. That's not even education. That's all preparatory for you to understand that you... How did Evola, in his book on Doctrine of Awakening, he said, he quoted somebody, that man is a god who is unaware that he is. It's a rude kind of a statement. But, yeah, basically, Shakyamuni taught people how to understand the way their life develops, how to understand and observe the real motivations in their lives. And then, in the final years, he says, by the way, you're not learning something from me, you're learning something about yourself, internal. That Buddha that you want to chase and accomplish, it's already there. I've been saying this to you for previous teachings, but you're not getting it. You're thinking that you have to reach inside yourself to instantiate something like me. No, it is Buddha-ness. It isn't like anything. It is enlightenment. You're Buddha, right? Sounds like an Oprah show. You get to be Buddha, you get to be Buddha. Buddha-ness is the engine of life. How is it that you can be anything other than a product of and a witness to the engine of life? Stop being a product of and amassing more product and be the engine of life. Be in that. That's the paradigm shift. Samsara Buddha-ness. The great teacher Dengyo said this: this is a direct way, but it is not the great direct way. He also says, because they have not yet understood the great direct way to enlightenment, the point being made in these passages is clear. You can talk about something or you can be that something. There's a vast difference. The bodhisattvas of the teachings preached before the Lotus Sutra, or of the theoretical teaching, have, in a certain sense, eradicated delusion and gained understanding of the truth. Yeah, they've been preparing their minds. They've been actually witnessing how they've created their own obstacles, right? That's great. Nevertheless, in the light of the essential teaching, they have gained only a temporary cutting off of the delusion. Comes right back, right? Not the kind that extends beyond a certain dimension. Therefore, it is said that they have, in fact, not yet cut off delusion. As much as they understand it, as much as they can get it under control, it would take very little for them to slip right back into it because they haven't left it entirely. When you're living moment to moment, completely in the engine that is the expression of potential, your life, there is no letting go. There is no, it's just gone. This is all-encompassing Buddha-ness, yeah? Thus, although it is said that the bodhisattvas had already gained entrance to enlightenment through the various sutras, the term, quote, gained entrance, is simply applied here in a temporary manner as a means of disparaging the achievement of the people of the two vehicles. Therefore, even the great bodhisattvas of the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings and the theoretical teaching arrive at the realization of the lotus of the Buddha only when they are exposed to the essential teaching, and achieve a true cutting off of delusion only when they hear the teachings of the lifespan chapter. Oh, I'm not trying to be Buddha. Buddha's already happening. I'm just caught unaware. The great teacher Tendai, commenting on the passage in the Emerging from the Earth chapter, in which a period of time measuring 50 small kalpas is, through the thus come one supernatural power, made to seem to the members of the assembly as though it were no more than half a day. Remember that? Says, quote, to the awakened ones, what seemed like a short period of time was understood to be a long one lasting 50 small kalpas. But to those who were still deluded, the long period seemed to be as short as half a day. Living in the delusions of samsara, we carry this amazing, huge amount of baggage of possessions and attachments, and we just consider that's life. All that baggage. That's who we are. But when we get to the lifespan chapter and we understand, Buddha-ness is not emanating from Shakyamuni. It's not something he found and we're all looking for it. He's just identifying a state of moment-to-moment emergence of our very life in this moment, happening right now. We all are happening right now. But we think right now with all this baggage instead of appreciating right now as it's moving momentum through time. Screw all that. Wow, look at all this. It's a huge shift, yeah? Miao Lo, in turn, explains this comment by saying, quote, the bodhisattvas have already freed themselves from ignorance, right? They understand. And so they're referred to here as the awakened ones. The ordinary beings of the assembly, however, have not yet advanced beyond the rank of worthy persons, and thus they are referred to as deluded ones. They're still dragging their identities with them. But when your identity becomes life itself, moment to moment, the need for labels and dragging along the past, it's just, get out of here. Let me go. Let me experience all of life. I don't need to be dragging all that crap around with me. The meaning of these passages is quite clear. It indicates that the bodhisattvas of the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings, the Myoho Renge Kyo, and of the theoretical teachings were in fact still deluded. And only the bodhisattvas of the earth, you and I, were worthy of being called awakened ones. But you have to awaken yourself. That's the law. Not the person. Not the person. We're not following. We're not trying to emulate Buddha. We're wanting to emulate someone who's pointed us in the direction of being Buddha. Nichiren. I reached for a pencil that wasn't there. There's that dualism again. Nevertheless, at the present time, there are certain persons of the Tendai school who, when they discuss the essential teaching and the theoretical teaching, declare that there is no difference between the two. And in interpreting the passages under discussion, they assert that the people taught and converted by the Buddha, Shakyamuni, in his transient status, are to be included in the category of the awakened ones. Well, they're awakened to an understanding of the process, but they're not living it. This is a gross error of interpretation, Nichiren says, since the meaning of the sutra passage and the annotations regarding it is perfectly clear. I do not see how anyone could put forth such an unreasonable assertion. Here's Nichiren being quite upset about misinterpretation. If we examine the passage in the, quote, emerging from the earth chapter, we see that it states that the bodhisattvas of the earth praised the thus come one for a period of 50 small kalpas, but to the members of the assembly on Eagle Peak who had been taught by the Buddha in his transient status, this seemed like no more than half a day. Yeah, we get what you're saying. No, you don't. You're not getting it. You're still seeing Buddha-ness as something imbued in this individual that you're trying to emulate. You don't understand it's already what you are. The very life you're experiencing is the point, Buddha-ness. Tendai, in his explanation, introduces the term awakened ones and deluded ones. He explains that because the assembly members who had been taught by the Buddha in his transient status were deluded ones, they accordingly believed that the interval of time was no more than half a day, though this was a mistaken interpretation of the facts. The bodhisattvas of the earth, on the other hand, were the awakened ones, and they, therefore, viewed the interval of time as being 50 small kalpas in duration, which was the correct interpretation of the facts. We're going to continue with Mao Lo, but I'm going to leave that for the next video. Kind of talked out for today. But that's long enough. Do you see how everyone's saying the same thing? That saying and talking around this, it's still not perfectly identified, but hopefully by talking around it enough times, it will start to become clear, it'll gel, that we're not trying to get somewhere. We're not trying to achieve or attain something. I know that's the language we do, but what we need to convert is our idea of the goal being somehow outside of our self-experience. That's what self-realization is trying to say, is that there's a self that sees itself identified by samsara, by possessions, by being with all the stuff. And you can understand that intellectually all day long, but until you, that you're in this moment now with everything that is instantiating and expressing, that this is a momentum, not a static thing, that everything is in flux and that we're moving with, in, of, that we are that engine of life, that we have a mind to witness it, perceive it, not to own it, not to identify with it, but to be free of identification. Still in samsara, though. Yeah, that's why it's so tough. Maintaining that awareness while coursing as a bodhisattva in the world. The only way you can understand it is to do it. How do you do it? Namo Myo Renge Kyo. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your practice. Please like and subscribe. It helps us expand our Sangha. If you can, support this channel and our endeavors, the bookstore and the mandala store, as much as I've been struggling with the bookstore lately, right? Let me know how you're doing. I'm proud of you guys, and I'm super grateful for your practice, okay? So take care of your health, be kind, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now. Myo